Each year at the end of August at St. Paul's, we mark a special occasion. Not that it's the beginning of finals footy, as exciting as that might be for some. It's not that it's the end of winter, welcoming warmer weather and more daylight. It's our annual time of teaching about giving, providing for the ongoing ministry work of St. Paul's and further afield, Springdale Community Church, the missionaries that we support, our head office, the diocese. I've chosen Psalm 95 as our encouragement this year. This psalm includes the reminder that we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Some of you might be familiar with Psalm 95 because it's traditionally said by the congregation in the service of morning prayer. In that service, the psalm comes after the confession of sin, which includes the line that we have strayed from your ways like lost sheep. Let me read from the psalm. Firstly, God is our rock, verses 1 to 5. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Nobody is greater than our God. There is nothing with more power and authority. Everything is his. Those last couple of verses are what is called merisms, M-E-R-I-S-M. A merism is when you use two contrasting parts, especially at the extremes, to imply the whole. So, for example, to search high and low is a way of saying that you searched everywhere. To call Jesus the Alpha and the Omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, means that he's the beginning and the end and everything in between. So to say that the depths of the earth and the mountain peaks are in God's hand, it means that the whole world is God's. Similarly, the sea and the dry land were made by God. The whole world was made by God. And so God's resources are not limited. The world is his, and he distributes its resources to provide for his people. When God is called the rock of our salvation in verse 1, it's looking ahead to the later part of the psalm that recalls the events of Exodus 17, when God provided water for his thirsty people from, of all places, a rock in the desert. God, the rock, can provide from unexpected sources and in surprising ways. Secondly, God is our shepherd, verse 6 and the first half of verse 7. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. So the call is to worship God, to love and trust and serve him because he is committed to us. He is our Maker, the one who has saved us to be his people. And he is our shepherd, as we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. God looks after us. We are secure because of his commitment to us. We're in his pasture. He promises to provide for our needs. And then the final part of the psalm is the second half of verse 7 down to the end. Today, if only you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massah in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. The Israelites had been freed from slavery in Egypt, and they came through the parted Red Sea. And so they had seen God amazingly deliver them from danger in ways that they could not have imagined. Did they come to the conclusion then that God was for them, that God really would keep looking after them? Unfortunately, no. When they got hungry, they grumbled against Moses. And they said, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve us, this entire assembly, to death." So in the midst of that grumbling, God graciously provided the Israelites with quail, the small birds that covered the ground in the evening, and then with manna, that bread-like wafer substance that covered the ground in the morning. Very shortly after this, the Israelites became thirsty and again grumbled against Moses. Here's the account from Exodus chapter 17. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" So there you go, that's the account from Exodus 17. When he called the place Massah and Meribah, Massah means test, they tested God, and Meribah means quarrel, they quarreled against Moses and God. Now the account of the Israelites in the desert isn't just some interesting history to look back on. It's also a warning and example for us. We are in a similar situation to those Israelites. They had been saved, rescued, to be God's people. They were on a walk towards rest in his promised land. So also Christians have been saved through Jesus. We belong to him, we are his children. And our Christian walk is a journey towards the promised rest with Jesus in his renewed creation. We also are called to trust in God, in his ability to provide for our needs, to trust in his intention to provide for our needs, that he is both able and willing. We've seen what God can do and that he is worthy of our trust. And so when the writer to the Hebrews, who is speaking to Christians, refers to this psalm, he tells us in chapter 3 to hold firmly to our confidence and hope, to not turn away from the living God, to hold our original conviction firmly to the very end. And so God speaks to his people today. Whenever we read God's word or hear God's word preached, we are hearing God speak to us today. And so the call in the psalm today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. That is a call today to trust God and to keep trusting God. This is why the service of morning prayer places this psalm, Psalm 95, immediately before the other Bible readings. Today, if only you would hear God's voice, do not harden your hearts. With the current stay-at-home orders, this is now the third Sunday that we haven't been able to gather together as a church. I find it very hard to come to this empty building to record the sermon. The church is you, the people of St. Paul's and Springdale. And when you are not here, this is not a church. It's hard to read the exhortation to come, let us sing for joy, when we can't come together, when we haven't been able to sing together for months, even when we could gather. We heard this week that the next potential time that we will be able to meet together will be the 12th of September, depending on the conditions in regional New South Wales at that time. It might actually be weeks longer than that, even perhaps into October after the school holidays. We don't know. But we draw comfort that we do know the one who knows. He's got the whole world in his hands, and he is able to provide what we need for us, for our families, for our communities, and for our church. We know God as our rock, the one who can provide for us when it looks like there's no hope. We know God as our shepherd, who provides pasture for his flock. And so we're able to have two responses to the God who provides, to be thankful and to be trusting. We thank God for the ways in which he has provided for our needs. And we trust God to continue to provide for our needs. We are thankful and trusting. And there are two corresponding attitudes that we have towards our own resources, our money, our time, our skills. The attitude that we have that goes with thankfulness is contentment. If we are thankful for God's provision for us, then we are content that what we have is what God has decided we need. These are the resources he's entrusted to us, and we'll be content with that. And the attitude that goes with trusting is generosity. If we trust that God will provide for us, then we're able to be generous with what we have. We don't have to carefully guard what we have when we trust that God will look after us. So because we're thankful for God's provision, we are content. And because we trust God, we are generous. Now let me briefly bring before you the situation of our church. If you get the printed version of this sermon, I've included at the end the page from our annual general meeting report with the budget for this year. And the main thing to note is the shortfall in income compared to expenses, which is not sustainable. Please bring this to God in prayer. He is the rock, he is our shepherd, who is able to provide for our needs. Thank you for your faithful giving to support and sustain the ministry here. Over 3/4 of our church's income is our giving, just over $100,000 a year. Earlier this year, we benefited from the tail end of the federal government's JobKeeper subsidy, that income support through the first wave of COVID. So this year we received about $6,000 from that. We also rent out a house which belongs to this church for around $15,000 a year. In terms of costs, almost 60% of our costs are related to having me as your minister. Then there are utilities costs of almost $10,000. Insurance is almost $10,000. Then there's the cost of running the parish car, doing our printing, church cleaning, council rates, maintenance and repairs, and more. We are also committed to giving away 10% of our offertory in support of mission outside of our parish, in particular to agencies like Bush Church Aid, supporting ministry in less well-resourced rural areas, towards Emma with CMS in South Asia, towards Alex and Naomi in Yokohama, Japan. We are also levied 13% of our income to support the running of the diocese, the head office which organises all of the parishes, for such things as the Creating Safe Ministries team and the bishops. We've had some one-off costs this year. We've replaced the ceiling fans in the church hall, as most of them had been faulty, so when warmer weather comes we should benefit from that. We've also had solar panels installed at the rectory, and we've had the electrical switchboards at the church hall and the church building combined into one, so we're not paying two access fees. So these involved upfront costs, the solar panels and the switchboards, that will more than pay off in coming years. We also intend to install a large LED screen in the hall, which will facilitate things like having the lights on during funerals so people are able to read and walk without having a trip hazard. We won't need to have leads running across the floor as we currently do with our projector. So we need to ask God to provide for us personally in these uncertain times, to provide for our families and our communities, to provide for our church. In particular, we need to make up that ongoing shortfall of about $20,000 a year. What might this look like? It means that the church needs about an extra $400 a week. If you divide that between 100 people, that's $4 each extra per week. If instead 50 of us increase our giving, that would be an extra $8 extra for those 50 per week. Or say 20 of us increase our giving, that's $20 each for those 20 people extra per week in giving. I know that some of you are going through a tough time financially with the stay-at-home orders reducing your income. Please reduce your giving if you need to. If you would like a set of envelopes for your giving, please let me or our treasurer Margaret know, and they can be dropped off to you. Non-contact, we can just drop it at your front door or in your letterbox. And please be aware that the church bank account details are in the pew sheet each week. The Temora Westpac branch details are in there. So let me end by saying that we trust the God who can provide, whose resources are unlimited. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. He is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care.